Now it's kind of frozen, but we'll see. Well, we got to go. We'll see what happens. Philippians chapter 2. We're going to look again at verses 5 through 11 briefly, and then move on in the chapter, maybe finish it up today. So Philippians chapter 2, beginning in verse 5. Have this attitude in yourselves, which was also in Christ Jesus, who though he existed in the form of God, did not regard equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking the form of a bondservant, and being made in the likeness of men. Being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. For this reason also God highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name which is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus every knee will bow, of those who are in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and that everyone will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Okay, let's pause it, and I'll take care of James here. Okay. Okay, any thoughts on our reading that? Maybe we want to new from last week, or go back and revisit what we were talking about last week, whatever you have on that. Verses 5 through 11. Paul's poem about Jesus being equal with God in the form of God, emptying himself, becoming a human, and even to death on a cross. Mm-hmm. He was a human before, or excuse me, he was deity before he was human. He was deity who took on the form of human by, instead of trying to be like God, reach out and grasp the forbidden fruit that will make you like God. He emptied himself. Instead of trying to grab a hold of something, he's letting everything go. So, how did he become human? Well, somehow in his thoughts and his actions and his life on this, living on this earth. I guess that's the only way I can try to grasp it. He was beaten, he hurt. He had friends, he had enemies. Everything that we go through, he went through. Particularly contemporary Christians have at times been accused of making Jesus into like a superhero. And I think that criticism may be valid in the minds of some people, but he wasn't like Superman walking around impervious to everything going on around him. Just because he could heal someone else doesn't mean he never got sick. Just because he feel sadness, grief, all those emotions. Mm-hmm. And yet it's an interesting, he didn't come into the world full of sickness, full of disease, full of all the problems that the world always has, and just fix all of the problems either, did he? He healed people. He blessed people kind of as he came in contact with them. Some of them were remotely, sure. He did some over the air, but most of them, it was a very personal and intimate encounter with Jesus that led to the blessing, whatever it was. So, yes, he is human. Yes, he is divine, but he experienced life much as we do, with a knowledge, I guess you could say, that was not ours. And we can't, and this is kind of in the handout, we can't replicate what Jesus did, because we're not coming. First of all, we're not starting off at the same place he started off. So we can't duplicate. We can't just. Jesus isn't sitting on top of a Xerox machine and somebody's putting a button and cranking out exact copies of it. That's not what's happening. We can empty ourselves, though, and work on it. And we don't do it as completely and as fully, perhaps, but we can work on that, and that self-emptying can be an ongoing, repetitive process, something we need to do not just once, but perhaps on a regular basis, and re-examine why we do what we do, what are our motivations. Are we trying to be like God in the sense of rejecting our status as the created, rejecting our status as inferior to God? Or are we trying to be like God in the sense that we are blessing and forgiving and loving? And because that is like being like God too. So, yes, sir.
Jesus died and arose, and as we look at ourselves and look at the life of this earth, to me, I look at it as described in the Bible, just a very short period of time. And you think about God and Jesus now, and I try to imagine it, but I can't really a place with no time. God is, there's not. If there is time, it's not in the way I appreciate it here on earth. It can't be, because it's told in the Bible that the place that go through that so totally different than the body will have. It's totally different. It's not corrupt. Why do things corrupt on this earth? Well, one thing is something dies, it starts corrupting, it starts molding, it starts disintegrating. But we don't see any indication of that in heaven. Heaven is, if I had to describe it in scientific terms, infinite. It's not from one heartbeat to the next heartbeat.
Well, we sing the song "Holy, Holy, Holy," who was, is, and will always be. And you think about how the human experience is at least presented in the scriptures is that you are, and you, in a sense, will always be, but you weren't always. It's not, you're not eternal, whatever. Now, a lot of New Age type stuff that's out there will tell you you're an eternal being, and this is simply an experience you're having in this moment in time, and you're eternal, you're infinite. I don't know. I don't know if that's Scientology. I don't know much about I know they like rich movie stars. That's about all I know about Scientology. But uh, this idea that you are kind of your own God, and in a sense, it's a temptation we really have to watch against at all times, because we can come to be um, kind of start considering being equal with God a thing to be grasped, that we can be like God. It is a human problem. It's what Adam and Eve had. It's what motivated the building of the tower. So it is not it is a very human inclination to want to supersede our status. And if we become more and more like Christ, we may be thinking we are becoming more and more, in a sense, like God. And in some ways, maybe we are. But we never forget, we never lose that status, because we are not eternal in both directions. We are eternal in one direction. And yes, that is the gift of everlasting life. And that's um, a humbling thing. It also tells us, I think, in really kind of more concrete terms, perhaps, when you are being called upon to make sacrifices in the name of Christ, look at the sacrifices Christ has made for you. And yours, in a sense, even if it's to the point of death, pales to insignificance compared to his. Even if you're crucified, because you're going onto the cross as someone who's always been human, someone who has not always existed, who's lived a human life. You did not give up. You did not empty yourself of being in the form of God to end up with this very humiliating death.
I can't do what Christ did. I cannot save this world.
Yes.
Christ saved this world. So look at that difference. Say, okay, I can become like Christ. Christ's life does not Christ was or is. There's a difference there. So following Christ is footsteps means something different than dying on the cross for the sins of the world. That's totally out of my league. There's no way that
people do give up their lives for other people. People die for other people sometimes, and parents will, I think, a lot of times instinctively, without even thinking about it, will put themselves in harm's way and maybe lose their lives if it's something they're doing to try to protect their child. They just I think it's a staged video. It's really funny, but it's an Asian family and they're working in a really small kitchen and there's a sliding glass door to the kitchen, so maybe the kitchen's kind of half outside or something. But there's a big fire on the stovetop, and the husband shoves the wife out of the way, grabs the daughter, runs out the door, and slides it shut. Just he's not worried about his wife. He's only worried about his kid. It's supposed to be funny, I think, is the thing. But there is that reflex, not to put your wife in harm's way, but certainly, hopefully, but to protect your child, protect your offspring. That is how really your ongoing presence in the world. That's one of the ways in which you are kind of, in a sense, eternal. Not really eternal, but beyond your years is in the having of children. And so we can sacrifice again, kind of along the lines of Christ, but not the same as Christ. We can be like God in some ways. We are called to be. I am holy, you be holy. But we still have to retain the understanding of our inferior status to God. That He's the Father and we are the children. That we serve Him, He doesn't serve us. He cares for us.
Think along those lines, that's going to define my position so well.
Yes. It should be humbling. Everything Jesus did, when we consider it, in a sense, it's humbling that God would love us so much to do that. And in a sense, it's uplifting in that it has been done for us. And now we can go on with our lives, with His life.
That extent, thinking of Christ on the cross, my sin could, in a sense, put me in my place. All I mean by that is that here's the Son of God, and as I read in the Bible, on the day of Pentecost, one said, "Rail," said, "Yeah, kill him." But yet they're then saved through the law, right? Mm-hmm. And to me, that's kind of blows my mind. Here's the one that said it was good to have him killed, but now what shall we do? Therefore, what to do? And can we, thinking about my kids, if they were killed by a man or a woman, could I do the thing that I did? Again, shows us how there is this difference. It doesn't mean that we can't work towards the goal of doing all these things, but it doesn't mean that it's going to be an easy path either.
Or to even more so, create a plan by which your child is killed in order to reconcile yourself to the people who kill your child. There's been a lot of people, a lot of little short films and everything try to encapsulate the message of Christ and His sacrifice visually in a kind of our terms. And I saw one that was really good. It was a family that lived alongside a river, and for some reason, I guess it was a kind of like a drawbridge. It had to be lowered and set in place for a train to come across it on a periodic time. And the father is there. He's working it, and the mechanism is a little faulty. And if he doesn't hold it down, the rat tracks pop up, and the train will get derailed. So he has to hold the switch down. And while he's doing this, he sees his son come running across the train tracks, towards him. And so he can either rescue his son, or he can keep the train, let the son die, and the train keeps going. That's a pretty good example, maybe from the emotional side of it, perhaps. But that implies defect in the mechanism, not in the people, but in the mechanism. And it's like it's a hard dilemma that is presented to God in a short period of time where he has to immediately make a decision. That's not how it worked, is it? I mean, this is the eternal plan. So it's a difficult thing to. There's really, I can't think of too many other things that are just like it. It's not.
Yeah, yes, there, yes. There's a God, there's the devil. Sometimes he's up with the devil part. God is so great. I was just reading about this begging thing to look at each other. A friend answer this dilemma. If there is a loving, caring God, why would he allow the devil? Why would he allow those things to want? And the best answer I can give him is the fact that he has given us free will. He is a true death. And we can choose that if we have that. And if you don't have one with the other, how can you make a choice? You can't. They're not both there. And, so it's not that God wants to be his devil. He's given us that choice. We have the choice to go to him or not. What if I that some people don't want to, they want to think of God, which I understand, as a loving, caring God that's going to do everything, to give you everything you want, everything you pray to when you do it. In this world, there's a lot of things that are negative in our lives, the things which we go through.
Adversities. Well, if all you ever did your whole life was play bumper bowl, where they put those big inflatable things down the gutters in a bowling alley. If that's all you did, you might think you're a pretty good bowler when you're a terrible bowler. That's so, yeah. So it's that's a very simplistic way of looking at it. And these are really hard questions. I talked about it's theodicy. Our job is theodicy, presenting and contending for the existence of God in the presence of evil. And it's a very hard issue, and there really are not argumentative answers. I mean, that is the question for Job, isn't it, really? That's, you can look and say Job couldn't have been perfect. He must have done something to bring this on. Well, when you say that, you sound like his friends. You don't sound like Job. That's what his friends told him. The point within the context of, not talking about the actual person, Job, but the story of Job, it is absolutely essential that he is blameless, that he is righteous, that he has not brought any of this on himself. And what's going on behind the scenes that Job doesn't know about? God and Satan have a little bet going, basically, right? We don't find out what the stakes are, what's going to happen one way or another, but it's maybe just for pride. There was a movie a long time ago. It's kind of raunchy. I don't know if you saw it or not, but they had a rich pair of brothers were like commodity speculators or whatever, and they put a $1 bet that they could ruin one guy's life and make another bum a great life for $1. That was all they were betting on. It was $1, and they did it. They ruined the rich guy's life and made the poor guy a wonderful situation called trading places. So why are God? They were acting kind of like that's kind of the story in a sense. The guy has everything, and you take it all away from him. And that's what's going on here. Job has everything, and he has to be blameless. If he's not blameless, then the story falls apart. There's not a lot of story anyway. A little bit of story sandwiched around a whole bunch of poetry. But when it's all said and done, God tells Job, okay, come at me like a man. Ask your best. Ask your questions. And God's response to Job's questions is basically, I can't tell you why. I make the world work. I make birds fly south for the winter and north for the summer. I make all this going on. You fit into that. You're part of it. But you're not all of it. It's like the kingdom of God. Every person is a part of it, but they are not all of it. It's about you, but it's not all about you.
And again, that's part of what we have to expand ourselves to include, like a little child, it is so important to them. This boy is theirs, this friend is theirs. They don't want to share it. As we get older, we have to learn to accept the fact that the world doesn't revolve around me. Yeah, we're the creator out there.
He sends rain upon the just and the unjust. And kind of, if you want to say there is an answer to it, the answer is if we can suffer when we don't deserve it, we can be blessed when we don't deserve it. And for everybody who says too many bad things happen to prove that God doesn't, that all these bad things prove God doesn't exist, well, what do all the good things that happen in the world prove? I mean, and which is it? Which is even more? Are there more good things or bad things? Kind of depends on each person's perception, but each person's experience too, each person's life. But I can look back at my life, and there have been hard times and difficulties, and a lot of times, usually it was because of something I did to bring them on. But God has been much better to me, has given me a lot more grace than He has allowed me to endure hard times. I have been protected a lot more than I have been subjected to the evils of the world. And if I have to look at it on balance, if it's pro and con, the pros way outweigh the con. And are we getting a leak again? So that wasn't the Spirit of the Lord descending upon you. It's a drop of water from the roof. Yeah. Well, you notice there's no like ash or steam rising off of her. She's not a vampire or anything. She's fine. But it's that's the argument goes both ways, really. You can flip it right around. If the evil in the world proves God doesn't exist, what about all the good in the world? What does that prove? And I think human beings, by and large, are as pretty good to each other. There are times when it's bad. There are people that hurt others intentionally. There are evil, wicked people out there. There's no doubt about it. But most of the time, you run into good people. When you're traveling, if you go to another country or you go to just another part of this country, and you're having difficulties, you can't figure out where you're going or whatever, usually somebody there will help you out and point you in the right direction and do it for free. They will take time out of their lives and help you, expecting absolutely nothing in return. And they may not be Christian. I'm not saying it's only Christians that do that, but they are creations of God.
First year I went there, people I was younger, I was 50. But I got a lot about yeah, much older. So I went down to the market, open air market, by the food there in the city. Figured out what I wanted, and I'd already changed my mind. That combination. And I was paying the guy at the counter there, where he had his specialty. Why? I didn't so much. This bus didn't give me that. I didn't realize the woman behind me, was watching what's going on. After he gave me the change back, she come up and she shook me.
She straightened him out, huh? He was a short change artist.
Then we were buying water.
That was probably his mom.
So, I found where they were getting it from kids and were saying quite a bit. They were giving out some, trying to make their money. But I found one place where they went to get the big pack of stuff. And I got it for big, and I gave them money of what I thought she wanted for it. And I'm thinking maybe 10 or 15 steps away from the floor, and I hear somebody yelling. So I turn and look at her. She's coming towards me to give me the change that she owed me to buy the water. So to me, it was fascinating here. I'm a foreigner in a foreign land, but I've got people that, you know.
And that is godlike behavior. That is the godlike behavior. You know, that is that where people who want to be like God, be nice. That's a good start. Be kind to people. Be honest with people. Be generous to people. That's a good start. If you want to be, don't worry about building a great empire. Don't worry about sending people to another planet. You know, if you want to be like God, don't worry about making sure everybody eats ground up cockroaches in 10 years. Whatever you want to accomplish, just be nice to people. Pay your workers a good wage voluntarily. You don't like the government telling you what you have to pay people. You don't like a labor union coming and telling you what you have to pay people. Pay them well voluntarily. Well, that happened a lot in Arkansas. If a company came and built a factory or something like that in Arkansas, and the unions try to come in, the people in Arkansas historically have been so poor, and there's been so little big industry. If some company came in and set something up and somebody tried to unionize, they would kick them out on their ear. They were happy to make what they were making and live in Arkansas. And I saw a lot of people when I lived in Aberdeen. I saw a lot of young people, and I'm guessing it's true here too. I haven't seen it as much, but a lot of folks in Aberdeen that wanted to be lumbermen. They wanted to work out in the woods like their dad did. They wanted to be fishermen like their dad was. They wanted to work and live right there on Grays Harbor County, one of the counties that's the poorest one in the state, one of the counties with the worst weather in the state. That's home. But somebody else is trying to tell them, no, you need to get a different kind of education, do a different kind of job, live somewhere else, do this, that, trying to manipulate and run their lives. God doesn't manipulate us. He presents a path. He gives us meaning. He gives us meaning in our life, whatever our vocation, our job actually is. And we do maybe have to at some point say, is this job consistent with my faith? Can I do this job and be who I need to be as a Christian? Those jobs exist. But it's also a transforming, this sacrifice that Jesus made for us is empty, by him changing who the nature of his being should change the nature of our being. We should become different people, not just fixing what is lacking. I didn't see the commercial, but there was a Super Bowl commercial with this new little ad campaign. He gets us, meaning Jesus understands us. I think he does get us, but he doesn't just get us, he saves us. And when he saves us, the old man or the old woman dies and a new one is born. He got you, he saved you. Now what are you going to do? You know, what's the response to that? What you do does not save you. Jesus has already saved you, but what you do should reflect the new person that you now are. You have emptied yourself. You don't use Jesus to fill in a sense of emptiness. You empty yourself and let God fill you. And that's a very challenging, it's like I said, I don't think it's something we do at one point. I think it's something we do on an ongoing basis in our life. Constantly dying to ourselves. Yes, sir. Yes. The imperfections. Well, Paul, the Corinthian church is fraught with disunity, and they follow different people. And Paul says, did I die for you? Did Apollos die for you? Did Peter or James or whatever, did they die for you? At that point, the answer is no. Eventually, they would die for them. But their death for them is really pointing back to the death of Christ, not on their own. Maybe a Marine somewhere died for you, but he didn't die the way Jesus died for you. Jesus didn't die with an M16 trying to take the other guy out. That's Jesus absorbed.
He took everything that was considered the bad of the world upon himself. To me, the bad is the fact that he was able to forgive, crucify him. He was the peace on the side of his expression of love didn't even go away.
Well, and kind of going back to the idea of self-emptying, while in the form of God, it shows that the sacrifice, the death on a cross is very important, that it's on a cross. But the sacrifice begins long before that. It begins before he becomes human. How does he become human? He's born of a woman. That's how.
Yeah, I can't put my head around what he done.
Yeah.
But,
Raise your hand if a woman gave birth to you. Ed and Thelma say no. Well, okay. Okay. Well, you've given birth and you've done it yourself, so you've been on both sides of that equation. But it's it's absolutely essential that he's human too. They're both, you can't diminish either one of them, and we can't really fully comprehend. I think we can kind of comprehend the humanity when we think about it because we're human. We can't comprehend fully the divine becoming human. How can you do these things? It is that he is not like us in some ways.
but yet he's willing to become like us.
He can put on us our humanity.
For a reason, that reason was the love for all things.
Mm-hmm.
When I look at the world and look what's going on in the world, how can even a divine being want to love some people in the world? But they do. I mean,
If you can remember any of the cop movies and crime shows from the 70s that were set in New York, they'd always show it real gritty and dirty and a lot of trash and stuff like that. They didn't have to set it up. That's the way New York was. They just went out and filmed New York. You know.
like you say, that Christ made that sacrifice when he said, I'm willing to go and not be God anymore, to be a man.
And,
At that point, he was making this big sacrifice. He had everything. He had no reason to give any of it up. But then he did.
and he didn't come into privilege by our standards. Was my where I good with that. He didn't come into a nice Manhattan apartment. He came into Hell's Kitchen, basically. He came into the gritty, difficult part of. He's born in the trappings of poverty. Maybe Joseph isn't really dirt poor. He's a skilled craftsman. He might have a decent business, decent living going on. But that's not how he's not born in his home, is he? He's born away. It's a everything about his life. And this is what I'm saying. When he empties himself before he becomes a human, everything about his life is a sacrifice. Being born of a woman is a sacrifice. Subjecting yourself to your parents, these earthly parents, when you're a father, and you know who your father is, that's a sacrifice. Putting up with us. Going to the DMV in Jerusalem, can you imagine what that was like? Just putting up with. I'll close on this. I was talking to my mom a few years ago. Her father was a really good man, but he was not a man of faith. He was just not a religious man at all. And we were talking about why he didn't go to church, and Mom just kind of finally said, "Son, your papa, he didn't suffer fools very well." And I was relaying that story to my dad the other day, and he was thinking about his father-in-law, who's been dead for 50 years now or whatever. And he just started laughing, hearing his wife talk about her dad that way. Well, he didn't. You know. And my dad loved his father-in-law, absolutely thought he hung the moon. But my dad came from a religious family, and my dad's very religious. Papa, Oscar, was not he was good, hard-working, very hard-working man, but not religious. And it's just following Christ requires a level of sacrifice that I think is impossible if you do it just in an earthly sense. If you do it just because it's going to make you happy, or just because it fills in some sense of whatever is missing in your life, or because you think you're going to have more luck farming or doing whatever it is your career is doing, because that's just not the promise. Jesus didn't give up and come to earth, go into privilege, go into a family that was doing really well on the stock market. He came in hardworking, low class, maybe artisans, lower middle class, what you might call, but in the trappings of poverty, in a nowhere town, Nazareth, where he grows up, not plugged into the social scene at all, not born in a sense to the manner born. That's not him. So it's a lowly existence, his whole life, really, and then a humiliating death, but resurrection, ascension, a return, exaltation. Every knee will bow to him.
Fishermen, Paul, who was right in the upper class, human structure, enough that he could get the documents.
Yes.
Christian, so you see that ability of Christ to draw just the ones that he needed, and that's the part of it that I'm impressed by anything but the fact that Christ died into heaven, left Christians, people on this earth who follow him, do his work.
But Christ had to suffer fools. I mean, that was one of the things. He had to suffer fools.
So he kind of turned it over
to the fools.
Which kind of, in a way, it makes it more human to him. That he is still directing things from heaven directly. I'm saying he's not, but directly. And now, here's his followers, he's here in front of them all the time. To me, that's like having a master that doesn't trust you to do your job. Because do it, but I'm going to be here with this.
Well,
I'll put you on the head if it's not.
Well, there is this difference in our understanding and our relationship with God from most other religions, and the intimacy and nearness we have is different. That especially in the embodiment of Christ, that God took on humanity to so that humanity could become more like God, came and dwelt with us. And he came to us not when we were really good, but when we were in the depth and the depravity and all that. So a lot of religions, you can go to God and go to your God and celebrate and everything, but only after you won a big victory or you've done something great. He comes to us when we're his enemies, when we're at the lowest we could possibly be. And we look around now, we may think this is as low as humanity's ever been. Well, maybe it is. I don't know, but maybe not. Oh.
This is an Eastern religion. You put the Jews.
When we really struggle with the scripture, it's usually because we're looking at it through Western eyes. It's an Eastern religion being practiced by a bunch of people in the West. And that, for, of course, many generations of Western teaching on top of the Eastern way of looking at the world. what they would call the ancient Near East. So it's doesn't fit us like a glove sometimes. It challenges us. We're struggling. It's our problem, not its. Okay.